Hello and welcome into another edition of Inside Town Government. I'm your host, Jared Ware. And on this episode, I'm joined by two ladies who are the chair and vice chair of the Commission on Disabilities, Katie Purvis and Carol Baker. How are you guys doing this afternoon?
Fine. Just fine. But I'd like to correct it. Carol is our secretary.
Oh, excuse me.
I know been in the past, but this round she's secretary.
Before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what the Commission on Disability is, we kind of like to start the show by getting just a little more personal background on the people that we have on and the people who are working in town, local town government. So Katie, we'll start with you. If you could just give a little background on yourself and how you got to this point being on the Commission on Disability.
Okay, I'm accustomed to wearing many hats. I'm a retired hospital chaplain. I am also retired from being a mental health clinician. Currently, my two hats are being chairperson of the Commission on Disability, but I'm also involved with solicitations and development for On Common Ground. I first got into this when our son was born and we knew something wasn't quite right. And it took a long time for specialists to figure out that he has Asperger's. At the beginning, most people in this country had never heard of the disorder. So we had to be active advocates for his care. About 20 years ago, I began to develop physical disabilities of my own. So as my son grew out of needing it, I grew into needing advocacy.
And Carol?
Yes, hi, I'm Carol Baker. I'm pastor at Central Congregational Church in Attleboro Falls. I began my ministry there in 1988, so going on my 29th year at the church. So I've been living in this area for all of that time, originally from the North Shore. I got drawn into the commission because of a particular person, and that was Bruce Alexander, Katie's predecessor as the chair of the Commission on Disability. He asked me if I would please join the commission. I am what our denomination likes to call a tab. I'm the temporarily able-bodied, but I was living with three people in a home where they all had physical and definitely physical disabilities, and I was also dealing with my mother, who was 97 and still living in her own home, and recognizing the fact that handicapped placard was a pretty good thing to have for her, and you know, and I just realized how difficult it is really to get around when you do have a physical disability. You know, I was in a wheelchair for a broken leg for a time, and it was just astounding to me that you couldn't get places when, you know, in a wheelchair.
Now, you mentioned TAB there, and I hear that a lot filming your guys' meetings, and
yes.
I fall under that category. Who knows how long
exactly.
You stay in that category, and I think a lot of people in town are temporarily able-bodied.
Absolutely.
And that kind of leads to maybe a lack of knowledge on what the Commission on Disability is and what you guys do. So could you fill in the gaps on what you guys are responsible for as a board?
Ooh, where to begin? A number of our members act as liaison to other town groups. DPW, the Planning Board, Parks and Recreation, the Veterans Agent. We also have a representative who meets with Dana. And what we do in those areas is to review plans for town construction, town events, and acknowledge the ways in which something could perhaps be more accessible, or where, you know, somebody forgot a ramp or a wide enough door. And we will work with those people to rework their planning so that accessibility is a possibility. A good example was the first year we had our annual awards for excellence. We were supposed to get up on the bandstand to make our presentation and discovered three of us were in wheelchairs. We couldn't get up on the bandstand. So these are the sort of things we run into in the town. And we've also been invited by several businesses, including our Hockomock area YMCA, to just go through the building and spot things that could be maybe improved or where something is needed and missing,
Right.
and give them suggestions on how they can make their building more accessible. On the other end, we do a lot of public education. We are on the town website with our own file, and we try to provide information on that file about things going on in the town regarding accessibility issues. We also do a lot of public education. We're trying to expand the number of ways we do that. This interview is one. We try to get in as many information tables as possible. We have one coming up at Shaw's Supermarket. And those are events where we can talk to people directly, but we also have tons of handouts about various issues in the town, like the 911 alert system. I think a lot of people don't know about that. If you fill out a form with the police department, the 911 system will automatically click up information anytime a call is made. And it will automatically tell rescue workers there is a profoundly autistic child in that home. There is a bedbound person in that home. And it prepares the rescue workers to know exactly certain things that need to be done immediately. And
Yeah, it's a part of Massachusetts general law that every town is asked to do, or suggested strongly that they should have a commission on disability, and it really is just to raise issues. One of the things we're trying to do is get rid of the word handicapped, because that's become very pejorative now. It really comes from an old English term, apparently, cup in hand. So it gives the idea that you're a beggar asking for something, when we believe that it's a civil rights issue, really, that every human being has the right to have accessibility.
Right.
So we're trying to talk now about persons with disabilities, is the politically correct thing to say.
Now, you mentioned some legislation in there, and I know that the biggest piece is the ADA. That really informs a lot of the decisions that you make, and when you review the plans. Could you briefly describe what the ADA is for someone who isn't familiar with that set of legislation?
Okay, well, in the first place, all the civil rights legislation that was passed in the 60s and 70s did not include people with disabilities. And the ADA, finally, when it came along 26 years ago, that is our civil rights legislation. It covers a number of issues. Most people think of the basic things like accessible parking, doors big enough for a wheelchair to get through, but it's also provided us civil rights in areas like housing, employment, greatly expanded the activities of special education departments. What else have they given us through that system?
It's just so far-reaching. It's hard to. I think you've hit most of the major points. Yeah, certainly employment, education, accessibility for daily living is how I read it. And there's another thing that the state has called the Architectural Access Board.
Right.
And actually, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Architectural Access Board actually can often overrule ADA, and it's usually more stringent rather than less stringent.
Right.
So,
and essentially, I'm sorry.
I'm just saying they're very, very understanding about issues of accessibility and really want to get things done the right way the first time, which we see so many things that get done quickly and they're done wrong. So now someone's got to pay for that to undo it. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the ways a commission helps in being able to review plans ahead of time and spotting the issues. We're saving North Attleboro money because the ADA or the Architectural Access Board can step in and say, not done right, let's tear it down. And of course, the cost of that is going to really increase what the town or local business is investing in that construction. So, yeah, I think the ADA is very important. What I explain to people, if you go back through history, in ancient times, people with a disability were considered dangerous marks of satanic forces, etc. And then in later times, you know, this whole concept of cup in hand came up. We were often pushed off into some side area of the town or outside the town limits, and we were just the beggars of the town. In more recent times, sadly, we dealt with the experience of being hidden away, cellars, attics, barns. And what really makes me cringe, when I see movies from the 30s and 40s, it's always a woman hidden away, and she always turns out to be a pathological killer. And those movies I just grit my teeth and turn the channel when I see them.
Right.
But that's why having a Civil Rights Act is so important to people with disabilities. It's the first opportunity to stand up and say, we're people first.
Right.
We have these rights. And it's made a major difference for all of us.
And I think as a commission, you guys cover a wide spectrum of disabled individuals, and your board is a reflection of that. Could you just speak about how the individuality of your board members and what unique perspective each of them brings to each and every meeting?
Well, starting with Bruce Alexander, who was most instrumental really in getting the commission up and running again. He was a person who dealt with blindness. Had a seeing eye dog that we jokingly said was ADD because that dog led him into walls and in the middle of the street and other places, and he always was so good humored about it. We have one member of the commission who has a hearing issue. We have one who has a heart issue and can't walk long walkways and so forth, and a lot of disabilities are hidden.
Right.
You know, if you see a person with a placard, they get out of the car and they don't have a wheelchair, you know, you say, oh, really? Yeah. But you don't know.
Right.
You know, it can be a heart problem, it can be a breathing problem,
Right.
it can be so many things. And our commission has to be comprised, I think, I can't remember the numbers exactly, but it's like the majority have to be persons who 85% have to have a disability or are living with someone with a disability. So we get the whole gamut. Yeah.
And at this point, the only two people who do not have a disability are Carol and Joanne Cathcart, who is the town's ADA coordinator. Every town has to have a staff member who deals with the ADA laws. And Joanne is our person, and she comes and joins us every month, and working in the incredible job she has here. She just knows everybody and everything. Have a question about town, Joanne can answer it for us.
Now, I want to talk about those meetings because I think one of the most interesting parts of those is you guys pretty much every month bring in a guest speaker, whether it be a department head, whether it be a senator or representative. How do you guys choose those guest speakers, and what have you guys learned from them and also help inform them on? Because it's not just them coming in and speaking to you guys. It is really an open dialogue where you're helping them as much as they're helping you guys.
That's the whole purpose of having guests. It's an opportunity for us to develop collaborative relationships, whether it's a department in town hall or whether it's an organization outside of town hall that services our town. Getting a guest has been a matter of a number of different ways. We find out about somebody who we think would be great to come in and talk with us. There are people who sometimes invite themselves. You know, gee, we'd like to learn more about what you're doing, so, you know, we invite them in. There are others where they lead departments that we feel are so vital to what we need to know that we go out of our way to contact them. A good example would be about, 4 months ago, we invited Julianne Hoyle, who is the Director of Special Education in town. Now, when I contacted her, I said, gee, it would be great if you could bring along a student.
Yep.
And she took that surprisingly to heart. She showed up with 5 students, a teacher, 2 aides, and a parent. And the students presented a slideshow that they had created that showed the entirety of what a day at special ed in North Attleboro is all about. Some of them required equipment that spoke for them. They did not have the ability to speak directly. But again, point out, if it weren't for the ADA, that equipment would not have been there.
Right.
It would not have existed if the federal government hadn't stepped in and said children in special education programs need all the tools necessary to learn to be full citizens in our society.
Yep.
But it has ranged the gamut. Let me see, we've had GATRA, we've had the Mass Office on Disability, we've had local leaders like Betty Poirier. She's going to be back next week at our monthly meeting, and she is also bringing along the Deputy Commissioner of Developmental Disability Service.
And I want to talk about that. We're recording on May 3rd, so this will be that's next
May
Thursday
10th.
that we're for May 10th.
Right.
And obviously you can watch that on North TV. We record all these meetings, so we'll be
Definitely.
there next Thursday as well. But can you just talk a little bit about that meeting coming up next week on May 10th?
Well, it started a while back where we started talking about the need to learn more about town and state legislative processes. We found ourselves assuming a lot, but not really knowing factually. And Betty Poirier is coming to talk to us about legislation that's currently being discussed. Something that is very important to us. We've sent all our state representatives a letter requesting that they support legislation that will universalize the language on the books. Excuse me. As Carol pointed out, the word handicap is a pejorative, but in a number of places in state legislation, that's the word used.
Right.
Some people attempted to soften that by referring to us as disabled people, disabled veterans, disabled teachers. But that doesn't quite work either because it emphasizes the disability rather than the person.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I'm a fundraiser with a disability.
Right.
I'm a retired minister with a disability. Who I am as a person matters most. So the proposal is to universalize all the language in state legislation so that it all reflects this change in the reference to us. That was one of the things that kind of got us questioning how much do we know, how much should we know.
Right. So that meeting will be next Thursday at noon. That's May 10th, and then we'll be airing it on North TV once that gets recorded. So if you're interested in that, be sure to either check it out in person down in the lower level conference room or on North TV. As we keep moving on here, I know that you guys as a commission across the state do a pretty good job, are pretty well known. You guys have got a pretty good system going on, and even other towns are reaching out to you guys to help set up and get their Commission on Disabilities going. Can you talk about what you guys do to help some of the surrounding towns and other towns across Massachusetts to get their Commission on Disability up and running?
Well, last year, with the partnership of the Mass Office on Disability, we hosted a regional conference in which the leadership of the Mass Office gave presentations on a number of the issues that come up the most often. They allowed participants to talk to each other, to introduce ourselves in terms of what we do. we had people come all the way from the western part of the state. And we included there some people from several different towns, including Attleboro, who are very interested in establishing commissions. And we try to provide people interested that way, number one, to come visit our meetings to get an idea of what they are. Number two, to answer questions and advice, even if we're not in a meeting. And number three, to just be a support to them. One of the problems with creating a commission is that in many towns there's the mistaken notion that we cost towns a lot of money.
Yep.
And as I pointed out, when we review construction or plans for an activity before it takes place, we prevent disastrous expenses. And some of the ways in which a construction site might be inaccessible could lead to an accident.
Yep.
And that leads to a lawsuit.
Yep.
So the expenses keep snowballing, and a commission will help prevent all that. And I think it creates a better communication system through a town. I think we help different town agencies and departments talk to each other. I think we're a good channel for helping people connect with each other and realize what each group is doing that may overlap.
Right.
We also called many of the neighboring towns. We got from the Mass Office on Disability the various places around us that were trying to start a commission or have. I'm still in contact with one of the towns down towards the Cape that, what did you do? How did you start? We wrote our own bylaw, for example, for the town.
Right.
And some people said, well, what do you need that for? Well, if the Historical Commission has a bylaw,
Right.
why shouldn't we?
Right.
Which spells out the membership and what we can and can't do and so forth. And so they've said, okay, we've done that, now what do we do? So I feed them the next thing that we've done. And it's been very helpful, I think, to know that other people are trying to do this stuff. But as you said, Katie, a lot of towns fight it.
Yeah.
And I've got to say, I've been on this commission now for at least 7 years, I believe, that this town has been very supportive of the Commission on Disability. They've been extremely supportive. All of the heads, the DPW, Mr. Gallagher came down when he was here for about 1 day and visited with the commission, and he mouthed his support as well. So it's just great to be in North Attleboro, where it's appreciated.
Yeah, and I believe Mr. Gallagher was himself the head of a commission in another town before he came here. So,
Yeah, so
he
he
has a
knew.
real sensitivity to it.
Right.
Now, you guys talk about the community giving back to you guys, and you actually give back and recognize people in the community with a yearly award. Can you talk about what that award is, who you give it to, and how the recipient is chosen?
Okay. Well, basically, they're called the Awards for Excellence, and they're given once a year at a ceremony at Dana's Strawberry Festival. And what they're about is one award is given each year to an individual and one to a business. And our current press release asks at the very beginning, do you know an unsung hero? And there are people in town who are obvious in the roles they play in supporting people with disabilities. But there are a lot of people in town who just don't get recognition. In the first year, our individual recipient was Jeff Mills, who is a psychiatric nurse. He is also a visiting nurse. And people who are homebound or who have limited mobility for one reason or another, they are his caseload. He oversees medication, gauges how somebody's doing. If something is becoming a problem, he makes sure that other professional caregivers know about it. The business that first year was Shaw's Supermarket. There were a number of people pointing out that in that store, we don't necessarily have to ask for help. Staff come right up to us in our wheelchairs or our guide dogs or whatever and ask us, what do we need? That isn't always easy to find in the local big box stores. And so we were more than happy. And the selections were based on nominations. We have a nomination form that we're trying to spread as far and wide as we can, and individuals send them in to us, and we review them, and based on how many people may recommend a particular person or how remarkable their activities in the town are. It's a group process, and that's how we decide. And the same for the businesses in town. We notify them, but don't publicize it to the world until the awards day. And it's been very effective. Jeff's whole family came. We were surprised. We thought he would just come in off duty for a little time and leave again. His parents were there, his wife and children were there. It was wonderful. And both with Shaw's Market and last year with what was then Tedeschi's, the managers brought in employees along with them because they're the ones who earned it.
Right.
Shaw's went so far as to have the employees who came with them be on the clock for coming to the event. But I think that just reinforces what a great business they are. And just still taking in nominations for this year. Kind of a surprise to us to wait and see whose names get forwarded to us.
Right. And when do you guys stop taking nominations for this year?
May 18th.
Okay, so a couple more weeks to get those nominations in, and
Right.
then obviously, if you catch this episode after that May 18th deadline, you can start submitting for next year's version of this.
Right.
We've got about a minute left, so I'd like to give each of you guys just a quick opportunity to just kind of make a closing statement on what you guys do as the Commission on Disability, and just any sort of final message you want to get across to the people who are watching.
I'd say my basic message to the community is that we are advocates. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you have something to offer, talk to us. Just simply talk to us.
Carol?
Well, I think also we are a resource, and we want to be used that way. We have a spot on the web with the town, so you can always find a lot of information on the website that the town has. Just look for the Commission on Disability.
And being at those meetings, I know that you guys welcome anyone to show up, and those meetings are once every month on Thursday, 12 o'clock.
Second Thursday of the month.
Yeah.
That's noon down in the lower level conference room. And if you're unable to make those meetings in person, we record those and we play them back on North TV. But if you want to show up, the door's always open. You guys are always willing to pull people up to the table to be a part of the discussion. And I'd like to thank you guys for pulling up a seat to this table today and having a little discussion about what you guys do with us here at North TV. And for all you guys at home for watching, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to another edition of Inside Town Government.